Hello, class. This week we're going to talk about the information report and get into some of the different elements of this. Very important genre in technical communication, uh, along with a couple other things here and there. But hopefully, you will have a better understanding of what's coming with the collaborative research report. Please feel free to let me know if you have any questions um, about this major assignment, or how I'm going to determine teams. I'll be in office hours and all that sort of stuff this week, so just let me know or shoot me an email. So, the information report is the most important document that we have, or type of document that we have in technical communication, or at least it's one of the foundational documents. A lot of other types of writing and technical communication build off of this genre. So it's useful to have a baseline understanding of it. And in fact, most of the rest of the semester we will spend talking about how to adjust your information report to fit the demands of specific subgenres like lab reports, recommendation reports, that sort of stuff, and how to adjust the stylistic and design elements of an information report to make sure it's as useful as possible. So, when we talk about instructive microgenres, just as a way to review, what we talked about last week was try to define what a genre was. Okay, a genre is a conventional response to a rhetorical situation that occurs regularly. Okay, no surprises there. They have a shared rhetorical purpose to inform, to persuade, whatever else. Okay, they create expectations in their auditors. All right, this is true of all genres, not just genres in technical communication. But if I am reading a lab report, I have certain expectations about how it's going to be organized. I have certain expectations for what kind of information will be included where. I have certain information or expectations about what kind of stuff I can skip over if I don't have time, what kind of stuff I need to reference if I need to look back at this. And all those things build in to make the document more readable or not, or more accessible or not. So that's one of the things that we talk about when we talk about genre, especially genre conventions as a filter or screen in terms of constraints that help the auditor better understand what you're getting at. Additionally, genres have a rhetorical move pattern, which we talked about with the microgenres, a common language, a familiar design, a regular context location. Now, we will talk about information reports over and over again. They have this rhetorical move pattern, but you don't have to be, um, you want to pay attention to how each genre has a slightly different, or each subgenre has a slightly different move pattern that helps distinguish it. Okay? So I won't bore you guys too much with going over what these different definitions are, what these different genres are, and how they move, but I will say when you're talking about rhetorically aware definitions, make sure you have a clear category and distinguishing characteristics, and that you be sure to use a noun phrase and be specific in stating both the category and the distinguishing characteristics. You want to be as precise as possible. In fact, most of the time, you are defining a term for your document, for the deliverable, not for all time, not for all humanity. You guys aren't working for Merriam-Webster's or dictionary.com or the OED. You guys are writing definitions for yourself and for your auditor. So you need to make sure and keep that in mind. So that's why you want to be as specific as possible. All right. In terms of instructions, you have this is the rhetorical move pattern. You have an introduction, contextualization, itemization, conclusion. That's typically what you do. Now, most of the thought that goes into instructions is focused on the itemization, but you want to pay attention to defining your auditor and the scope and safety concerns early on, and then recontextualizing so that we have a sense of what's going to come out of it, measurable expected outcomes. This itemized step by step by step, that is important, and I went over it last week, and kind of some of the things you want to do. Keep it in the imperative tense. Make sure that you are noting subtasks and feedback statements and all that sort of stuff. But this is only part of of the typical instruction. And as far as writing instructions, even if you're not using a lot of text and you're using mostly graphics, like the IKEA instructions we looked at, you still need an introduction, contextualization, and conclusion. Every IKEA or flat pack furniture that you buy, or any kind of thing like Lego books, that sort of stuff, they all at the end show you what you should have, what it should look like at the end of your assembly or at the end of the process. It's hard to do with like a chemical process, but you guys want to spell it out. What are the measurable expected outcomes? And then they also all have an introduction where they just kind of give a sense of what do you need, what are the items that you need. So when we talk about scope, we talk about purpose. What are the items that you need? What are the items you need to find? That sort of stuff. All right? Okay. I mentioned that the subgenres each have their own kind of their own little thing that you want to pay attention to, and that's they have that they have move patterns that are similar but a little bit distinct, and this is an example of that. Most descriptions, you could talk about this as a microgenre on its own, but the way that you use a description is very similar to the way that you use a source citation, like in a literature review or something like that. You have to introduce, you have to contextualize, and you have to conclude. Now, the difference here is that instead of citing, or instead of with a citation or source integration, where you integrate here and then cite, here you contextualize, which is the equivalent of the cite. Okay, it justifies the nature, the scope, and the purpose of the description, but it also gives the auditor a way to reference it and understand what's going on, right? So that's where the purpose comes in. And then instead of choosing whether to paraphrase, quote, or summarize, you offer a well-organized description. These are similar subgenres because they're doing this. They're doing similar work. They are. You use a description the same way you might use a citation, and the difference being, well, first off, you use them both so that you can support your argument and help your auditor understand something, right? The difference between the two is just a matter of like where it's more appropriate to put a description in and where it's more important to put a citation in. Either way, they often serve the same supportive function to help you empower your auditor or help you inform your auditor or whatever to prove your argumentative claim, to help with the rhetorical claim. Okay. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. But we didn't go a ton into descriptions because you guys have written research papers. So I'm assuming that you have an understanding of how to integrate this sort of stuff. But pay attention to that chronological, spatial, and functional organizational patterns, as we'll come back to it, to organization later on, I think next week. So the last thing I just want to say, I put the second lecture up about torturous syntax or effective communication, looking at the stylistic elements. It's so important that when you're looking at and revising your writing that you pay attention to what you are doing as a rhetor to present content so that the auditor can use it. That's what the central element of all this talk about grammar and translation and all that sort of stuff that's going to be in this class, and we've already talked about. All of that is centered on this cooperative approach with concrete answers to specific concerns. Those, you can't provide concrete answers to specific concerns if you're losing your audience with dense prose or with self-conscious meta discourse. Those things get in the way of providing concrete answers to specific concerns, and that's what Pinker is trying to help you get a better understanding of, and that's what the lecture that I posted on Thursday is trying to help you get a handle on. What is the concrete answer to the specific concern? To clarify that as much as possible so that this screen is more of a lens, that these constraints aren't limiting your approach to your auditor, but helping you better explain stuff so your auditor can use it and understand. All right. So, when we talk about grammatical norms, when we talk about stylistic approach, it's important to see how those two kind of go together. This idea of clarifying things, the concision, precision, and clarity all go together with these idea of grammatical norms, because the norms are there, these rules are there, right branching syntax, or parallelism, or negation, the rules about negation. All of these things are there, the stuff that Pinker talks about in chapter 5. All of them are there because they are shared rules that if the auditor speaks the same language as you do, they can use that shared grammatical rule to make sense of and understand what you're talking about. That's what grammar's there for, right? Whether it's descriptive or prescriptive, it's there to help make sure that your precise, concise, and clear message is articulated and understood the way you want it to be. All right. We also talked about like the different elements that go into choosing syntactic control, or choosing how you're going to write your sentences. So, for instance, rhetorical purpose, if I'm trying to clarify something in that moment, or if I'm trying to restate something, or if I'm trying to make an argument, all of these things, or make a comparison, all of these things require different sentence types. And so when I talk about rhetorical purpose, what I'm referring to is if I'm revising, or rather if I'm editing, and I'm looking at the sentence level of each and making sure it's as clear as possible, if I see something and it doesn't feel quite right, I want to first know what's my purpose, what am I trying to do with this sentence? And if I don't know what it's there for, then get rid of it. But if you do know what it's there for, then use that to inform what kind of sentence you want it to be, or if you want it to revise it, use that to help you revise it. Okay. Remember, complex sentences are good for clarification and nuance. That compound sentences are good for comparison and contrast, and that simple sentences are good for declarative statements or restatements. Okay. I mean, there's more to it than that, but that's a good shorthand. Content complexity has to do with this. How complex is the idea, or how complex do I want it to be in that sentence? Okay, do I want them to have a quick takeaway? Well, then maybe I need a simple sentence. Do I want them to understand how this engine works in concert with other parts of the machine? Then maybe I need to add more and use a complex sentence. Auditor relationship. So how close are you with the auditor? Not just like, are you friends, but like, do you speak the same language? Are you both experts in this field? And it's just a small difference in what you understand? Or are you going to need to explain more and more information, which means you should probably break up your complex sentences into simpler statements, because you need to match the cognitive ability of your auditor and help them understand what you're talking about. Genre formality, we talked about, we talked about that a little bit. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. So this is just a quick guidelines. Use a variety of sentence types for rhetorical effect. Okay? Don't get locked in on simple sentences. Think about it. If you see that something seems like a dense paragraph, then maybe that's because you have too many complex sentences. Throw a couple simple or compound sentences in there. Variety it messes with the rhetorical purpose, right? But it helps your auditor take a break and understand something in a different way. And so that's one of the reasons you want variety. Revise for parallel clause and subject-verb agreement. That's to help organize information clearly for the auditor. And always consider your auditor's cognitive abilities, right? Help them by only adding a little bit of new information as you go, and don't overtax them by assuming they follow and have as good of an understanding as you do, right? So that's where that curse of knowledge comes in, knowing, okay, or at least trying to know, does my auditor understand this? Are they following along, or do I need to spend a little more time explaining this, right? So that's something to consider. And then use signal words and punctuation to guide your auditor, and that's where the grammatical norms help enhance what you're trying to talk about. So, the information report. Like I said, we talked about genre, right? We talked about all these different things. When it comes to an information report, the primary goal, to go back to this, The shared rhetorical purpose of all information reports is to provide clear, accurate, specific information to an audience, right? This is that idea of empowering your auditor. That's why technical reports are so central to this type of writing, is that they provide clear, accurate, specific information to an auditor, to an audience. This is not about trying to cover everything that is in that topic. This is not trying to cover everything that's ever happened. This is trying to help the auditor understand a specific issue, right? And often that's tied to that idea of concrete answers for specific concerns, right? Often they involve interpretive analysis. It's not most information reports are not just giving the information, clear, accurate, specific information. They are trying to offer some interpretive analysis. That's because you guys are subject matter experts in some way. You've either done the research or you've read deeper into the topic, or you actually are an expert because you've studied the thing, the discipline, the field, or whatever else, or you've worked in the field for a while. Either way, you have some expertise, and so most information reports are trying to offer interpretive analysis in some way to help the auditor understand what's important and how they should react to it. You're not trying to necessarily persuade them, right? You're not trying to get them to change their opinion on what they think of something, but through interpretive analysis of the situation, of the information, you are trying to help them understand what's going on from your expert vantage point, right? Sometimes they offer recommendations as well, but these are, and that's the key here, they are recommendations. They are not arguments and conclusions. You're not forcing them to do something. In fact, most times an information report has several recommendations so the auditor can choose what they want to do about a situation or a problem or an opportunity. Okay? So there are quite a few constraints that go into this technical reports, and we'll talk about this as well throughout the course of the next couple of weeks. Now, just to remind you guys, when we're thinking about your final technical report, you might think about this as we talk about the information reports, as a way to focus your understanding of what we're talking about, right? But here you have the purpose of the final report is to utilize what you have learned to craft a well-designed document, show mastery of technical style, and conform to conventions. That's from my point of view. That's what I want you to do, okay? It should also, to go back to this, should also provide clear, accurate, specific information from a subject matter viewpoint, from a subject matter expert viewpoint, okay? So with interpretive analysis, of something that you are passionate about, something that you know about because you've studied it, or that you know about because, it's a hobby or a personal interest or whatever else. And that can be something that you've studied just this semester for the sake of the report, or something that you've studied for the last couple of years, right? So the other part of this is that, to go back to this, we will talk about the move patterns, we will talk about the language, we will talk about the design, but you want to think about what are the expectations that your intended auditor, not me, because if you look at the final technical report prompt, I'm asking you to write it to a specific audience. What are their expectations when they see a recommendation report? What are their expectations when they see an inspection report? What are their expectations when they see an academic essay? How are you best going to position the information so that the audience knows what to do with it and can read it effectively? Okay? So that's why I give you a number of different ways to write this final technical report, right? So you have common information report, you have field report, you have a recommendation report, lab report, annual report. If you're into, or market analysis, those two things are more financial documents, but they're still information reports, conceptual literature review. There are others as well that I've added to this list. In general, though, it's important to think about, okay, if the goal of information reports is to provide specific, clear, and accurate information, and that they often involve interpretive analysis, how do all of these different subgenres fit into that? Okay? Well, they have a different rhetorical purpose a slightly different rhetorical purpose. Okay? So, for instance, your common information report is often based on secondary research, and the interpretive analysis is content focused. It's very much about, okay, this is what I learned, this is what you should know about this problem or this opportunity. Okay? Field report is more rhetorically oriented or more situational. It's talking about the whole thing, and a lot of it's the relationship of the auditor to the reader to the content. It's all integral to understanding the field report. That's why field reports, as opposed to common information reports, feature a lot more methodology because you're trying to show how you, as the reader, came into this situation. Okay? And made this and studied this for the auditor's purpose, for the auditor's benefit. Okay, so that involves the entire rhetorical triangle: the auditor, the content, what you found in your field report, and the reader. Recommendation reports are much more auditor focused. It's less worry. There's less worry about what you did, although you still need to spell that out for credibility reasons, but more of a worry about how this is going to help the auditor. And in fact, what a lot of students get confused about when they talk about recommendation reports is that they lose track of the fact that the criteria and recommendations are all auditor oriented. They are all about what the auditor needs to solve their problem or address their opportunity. Okay? They are not written like a field report, which might have recommendations, with the recommendations being an afterthought. No, these are all about how do I help this fit your needs and your criteria. Okay? So that's what the difference is in terms of rhetorical effect. Lab reports are much more formal. It has to do with what they're trying to do, right? A lab report is, supposed to stand up for a long period of time, contribute to an academic or a scientific argument or scientific discussion. And so they are much more stringent about, like, this goes here, stay out of it, keep it objective. This kind of information goes here. Don't add your own idea of what happened until this section. It's much more cut and dry and constrained than a lot of the others because it's a very formal report. And then you have status reports and incident reports. Well, status reports are focused on, like, the bigger picture, context, right? How does this fit into how I'm writing? How does this fit into how the project's developing? That's what a lot of this is, and so it's more contextual. Incident reports are more exigential. They are focused on, like, what happened? What was the problem or opportunity that forced me to write this incident report? And so since the focus shifts around, that's why they form their own kind of report types. And the rhetorical move pattern shifts with them because it's trying to adjust to different focuses, focal points. And the language changes and all sorts of stuff. And then you have all further adaptations that result from auditor-reader relationship, or the nature of the exigence, or the thing that prompted the report to be written, or the context, or whatever else. Okay? So what kind of information is central to each report type? Well, I already kind of went over this, but what's important to know is that purpose and auditor come into this a lot. Your auditor might change a lot depending on what kind of writer you are, which adds to that further adaptation. But the purpose is going to determine what kind of report you write. Right? So when you're looking at a exigence, at a problem that's going to need you to write a research report or a information report, whether that's the collaborative research report prompt, the final technical report prompt, or a lab that you're working on, or a poster presentation, or a capstone project, whatever, you have to start with these kinds of questions, because this helps you get to a better understanding of what kind of report would best be, what's the best kind of report to write. Okay, so what is the purpose? Okay, what are the main claims covered in the report? What is the exigence that prompted the report? What relevant methods that were used? What results will effectively inform your auditor? Okay, all of these questions help you figure out, after you've done some research, what kind of report will work best. Now, you might go in thinking one thing and then adjust it after you've got some research in. So, for instance, last semester I had a number of students start with a field report, but then the context and the exigence changed because they were doing research into the young library and effective study patterns, and then campus shut down, so they couldn't finish their uh, field reports. So they shifted to a recommendation report, a recommendation report based off of some secondary research and some primary research, right? So they went in thinking, okay, what is the purpose of the report? To get a better understanding what happens at Young Library. What are the main claims? Well, they figured that out. Okay. But then they realized, okay, what results will effectively inform your auditor? Well, they don't have any reliable results from their field research, so they switched to a secondary blend and made the results meaningful for the auditor. Okay. There are other types of reports, as Markel points out, and a number of other people. So, for instance, you have directives. Directives are auditor focused. They're not recommendations because they have to do with, well, if you're giving a directive, if you're writing a directive, then you have some authority. So it's not so much you should do this as you will do this, right? And so but it's very much aimed at the auditor, whoever's receiving that memo or whatever else. Market analysis, inspection reports. These are field reports. Okay, it's market analysis depends on who your auditor is, what's happening in the market, and your expertise and your interpretation of what do you think is going to happen with the market. Okay. Progress reports, annual reports. These are status reports. These are contextual. Meeting minutes are another form of information report. They're usually just typically a memo, but you can formalize it depending on what you're talking about. Conceptual literature review, that's content. That's more academic than it is technical, but it is written with the same ideas in mind of presenting specific, detailed information, right? So all these different types of reports fill different rhetorical needs. And so it's important to think about, okay, what am I hoping to do with this information, right? What am I hoping to do with this? What do I think my purpose is when it comes to this redor, or this auditor, rather? So am I trying to inform them? Okay. Well, then I'm probably going to be doing a field report, the top 3, right? If my goal is simply to inform. I'm sorry, I meant these 3. If my goal is simply to inform, then I'm probably going to write a lab report, a common information report, or a field report. Those are very informative oriented. Now, then it comes down to, what am I trying to inform them of? If I'm trying to inform them of the specifics surrounding one situation, then, especially if I'm using secondary research, then this kind of thing is what I'm going to lean into. If I'm going to be doing a detailed analysis of a site, whether that's a virtual site or a physical site, then I'm probably going to do a field report. Very similar, but different content. So the rhetorical situation changes, so maybe my subgenre should change as well. Here, my auditor is less well known to me, right? Because the auditor for most lab reports is an obscure, like, scientist that you're trying to write to, or you're trying to address both an obscure scientist that might want to know what happened with this lab and a specific lab supervisor or somebody else. And so you have multiple auditors, but one of which requires you to be very formal and very objective. If my goal is to persuade, then maybe I'm writing a recommendation report, right? So I need to address things a little bit differently, look at how I organize the information a little bit differently, so that I'm helping the auditor and providing worthwhile recommendations for them. What I'm getting at is, think about which of these will work best after you have a sense of the rhetorical situation. You need to have a sense of the rhetorical situation before you can really make this call. You need to know who your auditor is, what they hope to get out of it, So how do they hope to be empowered? What the content is, or at least a rough understanding of what the content might be, and where you are and what you hope to get out of it. If you know those three things, then you can, most of the time, answer and figure out which kind of report you're trying to write. Okay? But, and I'll say this now without dragging this on too much longer, if I have field analysis and a good set of data to help me talk about what's happening at a site, but I write it like a lab report, then my auditor has different expectations for what they're looking at. So a field report is a mash of qualitative and quantitative data. It's very focused on a specific incident or a specific series of incidents at a specific site. It's not generalizable. So, but if I have a lab report, the assumption is that all this information is generalizable, that I can take it out and use it to inform only slightly related situations, okay? Because there's some takeaway from that objective and well-controlled research, whereas this is not as controlled. So if I position my or my field report as a lab report, then I'm confusing my audience, and that'll lead to further problems. Additionally, if I have a recommendation report, or I'm trying to write recommendations based off of criteria, but I don't make that clear up front, then, and it makes it look like a common information report, then what I'm trying to say is a very specific auditor-oriented series of recommendations just seems like, oh, this is what everybody does. And some managers might say, oh, if everybody's doing it, maybe that's what I should do. But some managers will be like, but that has nothing to do with us. And so the effectiveness of your recommendations loses focus because the expectations of the auditor are different. Okay, so when we talk about genre being tied to auditor expectations, and we talk about it being tied to rhetorical move patterns and all that kind of thing, the move patterns and the language and that sort of stuff signals to the auditor what kind of genre it is, which triggers the expectations and allows them to approach your information with a certain mindset. Okay, which, to go back to our goals for technical communication, makes it much more easy to communicate effectively. All right. So the informative rhetoric, we talked about the final technical report. When it comes to the collaborative research report, I'm asking you guys to think about how COVID has changed learning on campus by looking at UK's Learn Anywhere initiative. Now, because this is an online course, I didn't want to force anybody to go on campus for research purposes. So all of this research can be done through a broader approach that is all online and virtual. Okay? But one thing to think about is looking at the prompt, you get a sense of what the rhetorical situation is, and your purpose will inform, or your purpose and the team that you end up with will inform whether or not you write a recommendation report or a field report. Okay? Whether or not you study the site and see how it works, or you offer recommendations for how they can improve the site. Everybody's going to be working with the Learn Anywhere, right? Everybody's going to be working with the all the different offshoot offices and how they're approaching COVID-19 in this semester. You all have the same series of exigents, but you may interpret and think about it in different ways. So when we talk about fall 2020 and the COVID-19 response and Learn Anywhere and all that sort of stuff, there are a lot of different problems and opportunities nested within that larger issue. And so that's why I'm asking you guys to, and hopefully you've already done this, to post some ideas for what you might do for Learn Anywhere, or for this collaborative research report, as far as things that you would study. But here are some examples, right? If I am writing a field report, I might do a virtual resource center, the Writing Center, MathScheller. I don't know if MathScheller is virtual. honestly. I think they are, but I'm not sure. But if I look, I'm looking at the Writing Center. I want to see how they are coping and adjusting to what's going on. That I might ask to sit in on one or two online counseling sessions, okay, or more than that, hopefully. And if I'm doing that, then I'm sitting there and virtually observing how people interact with and approach these resource centers. If I'm doing that, then I'm doing a field report because I'm looking at interaction. I'm looking at uh, some of the nonverbal signals that are coming through, like pauses in the chat or whatever else. And I'm trying to understand how this is working in or on campus when it comes to the site. That attempt to understand is going to be colored by my approach, by my auditor, the writing center, or whoever else. What they're hoping to get out of it, and by the content that I find. So I am probably going to write that rhetorically oriented or situationally oriented, the green boxes. I'm going to be looking at field reports, market analysis, that sort of stuff. So I'm probably, for the sake of this collaborative research, we're going to write a field report. Okay. Same thing with virtual recovery via the collegiate recovery community. So this kind of observation is going to be harder to get at because of, you know, the nature of the necessity for anonymity and that sort of thing. But you can see how they have adjusted or how they are changing their approach on social media and adjusting to different news events on campus and that sort of stuff, and track it over time chronologically. That would be a field report, right? Explicitly a field report. But if I am instead trying to help the Learn Anywhere improve their approach or improve the resources that they offer, then I would combine some observation with some survey with some other stuff to better help them write and design websites that work for students on campus. That's a recommendation report. Okay, if you have any questions about this, please let me know. I will also say a lot of times, especially with this kind of thing where you're not doing, you know, situational observations and that sort of stuff, there can be a lot of overlap between this, and you can flip between them before you end up turning in your final report. But understanding what your purpose is and what you're hoping to highlight and how you're hoping to help your auditor is going to make a big difference in this. All right. So the last thing I'll say is just your recommendation report is, sorry, I got distracted. Um, the idea of a recommendation or a field report would be trying to, I'm just going to move on. If you have any questions about this, I think I've gone over this enough. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Basically, I'm asking you guys to figure out if you are, when you meet with your team, if you guys are more interested in a auditor-focused series of criteria based off of like what they need and what they're hoping to get out of it, and helping them improve their approach. That's very auditor-focused, right? That would be, this one, right? Auditor-focused, constrained, whatever. And then the field report is a broader approach that presents information to the auditor afterwards. It's not as intensively working with the intended auditor. Okay, so for instance here, if I'm trying to help get mobile access to CARES resource page, if I'm trying to improve that, then I'm going to have to interview somebody at CARES and see what they're hoping to get out of this resource page and what they're hoping to do. Okay, if I'm trying to help with the tech help tutorials, I have to talk to somebody at ANS's Hive or another tech center on campus and see what their goals are with the tutorials that they provide. Okay, so if I'm doing one, if I'm focused on the auditor, then I'm probably doing a recommendation report. If I'm focused on the situation, then I'm probably doing a field report. Okay. Either way, this is what you're going to end up doing to help build the research. Okay. Including a primary research protocol. Okay. I don't know what this is about. All right. So, if I am focused on the recommendation report, then you have to have a much better understanding of who your auditor is. But even if I'm writing a field report or a common information report or a lab report or a memo, knowing who your auditor is going to make it much easier to address their concerns, provide information that's important for them, and empower the auditor to make decisions and to do whatever. So the last thing I'm going to talk about today is this idea of the rhetorical auditor. Now, we've talked about this a number of different ways. So this shouldn't be any sort of concern or any sort of surprise for you guys. But I do want to point out again, when we talk about technical writing, the goal of technical writing, first and foremost, is to help the auditor use the information, right? And a lot of times that is based off of, as I mentioned earlier, interpretive analysis by a subject matter expert, you. So if I am interpreting things for them, then the auditor has to trust me, right? And if they are trying to use this information to solve problems or whatever else for themselves, then they have to understand the content. So whenever I'm writing technical communication, I don't pay as much attention to my understanding of the content. It's assumed that I understand the content because I'm the subject matter expert. What's more important is, am I helping the auditor understand it? Okay. And does the auditor trust me? So that's what I'm trying to get at. Even with something like the collaborative research report, the assumption is that you've done the research, that you've looked into it, that you've looked at other sites that provide similar services, or you've looked at some scholarship that talks about how tutorials should be organized or whatever else. Okay. So you are assumed to understand this. So instead, what's important is, are you trustworthy? Do you show your work? Do you give credit to other people? Do you point out some of the shortcomings of your methodology, whatever else, to show that you're credible? And can the auditor trust and understand the content? Okay. The other thing that you need to pay attention is how are they approaching this problem or this opportunity? Are they aware that it's a problem or an opportunity? Or do they think everything's fine? So, just to go back, this site, the online course tip, unless they've completely redone it in the last couple weeks, this online course tip is a mess. It's a whole bunch of PDFs that are linked to elsewhere that are hard to access, especially in a mobile setting. Like, they're just not user friendly because of the way they have it set up. So one thing that I might consider is, does the Learn Anywhere initiative, does the site director understand that there's a problem with their online course tips, right? Are they aware of the exigence? If they are, then great. We have a common understanding, okay, between the writer and the auditor. If they're not, then I need to help them become aware of the problem. Especially if in your research you find a smaller problem or a more specific problem. You have to let them know what the problem is, but relate it to their own understanding of the exigence, of why they're reading this report. You either have to point out why they need to read it, or point out, how this report relates to their own understanding of the problem, right? Because at its core, they're going to read it, okay? You also have to consider what's the context that, as they interpret it, surrounding this document, okay? You can't have a complete understanding of that because you're not in their head, but you do want to think about, okay, how might they respond to this? How might they understand this? Okay. And you have to think about their understanding of the constraints and how, to the idea of auditor expectations, how these constraints filter and help the auditor understand something. Okay. So, how does the writer's purpose influence this model? Well, the key here is that if I have a clear understanding of how and why they should understand this content, okay, then I have probably taken into account my relationship to the auditor and why they should trust me. I've probably taken into account what the purpose is and their understanding of the exigence, okay? Because if it's a long distance problem, then my purpose is muted, right? If it's something that's going to happen in 5 years, then my purpose is muted. If instead this is an urgent problem that needs to be solved in the next couple of weeks, then my purpose is going to be heightened, and I'm going to be writing much more persuasively because I've taken into account the exigence and the auditor's understanding of the exigence. Okay? It's just something to think about. So when we talk about the writing process, we've talked about this before, but when we talk about the rhetorical auditor, you're really coming down to the first part of this, and the first part of any document that you're writing, especially for technical communication, where you're not starting with what did I learn, what do I understand. You're starting with what does your auditor need to know. That's the driving force behind technical communication, right? So analyzing your audience is the first important thing to do, because if I've analyzed my audience, then that helps me tailor my purpose to fit their needs. It's the goal of technical communication. So if I know who my audience is, then that helps me understand what the purpose of the document is and what I'm trying to do, okay? Which then allows me to choose appropriate tools like the appropriate genre. Okay, a genre is a rhetorical tool. It's not like a hammer or a screwdriver, but it is a tool to help someone understand something. So I choose the appropriate genre, the appropriate mode of transmission, PDF, whatever else, and anything else. All right, and then it also helps me generate ideas, right? The content behind the document. But if I don't understand who my auditor is, then it is hard for me to get to understand what the purpose is, other than to get a good grade, or what the purpose is other than to write the report because I was told to. But if you understand the purpose, that makes it easier to write and helps you choose appropriate tools and generate ideas. Okay? So, Markel's advice in general for auditors is for figuring out your auditors is to analyze your audience, analyze your purpose, analyze your subject. Okay? This kind of information on page 118 is very useful. Okay? What he's basically asking you to do is figure out the rhetorical situation. Who are you writing to? What's the exigence? What's the content? Okay? Consider document type, rhetorical constraints. Work out a schedule. Budget is a rhetorical constraint. Schedule is a temporal constraint. Okay? Determine what information will be in the document. That's separating context from the scope of the document. So that's scope, that's context, that's content. Create questions you need to answer. This again, these are drive research, but that's rhetor oriented. Okay, so these are all parts of the rhetorical situation, but it starts with who are your primary auditors? Okay, why are you writing to them? That's the first thing. Analyzing your audience. Who are your primary auditors, as opposed to secondary and tertiary auditors? Okay, secondary auditors. I'll say this now, and I'll probably end up saying this again. Secondary auditors are people that will read your document and use the information, but can't make decisions based off of it. And tertiary auditors are people that will read the document, right? You could have, fourth level, fifth level auditors as well, but secondary are those that read it but can't make managerial or financial decisions or whatever based on it, and action-based decisions. And secondary audit, so that's secondary, they can't make those decisions. And tertiary, they will read it. So for instance, for the final technical report, I, as your professor, am a tertiary auditor, right? I will read your report, look at it in terms of stylistic and design elements, but I'm not going to make any decisions based off of it. All right. What kind of deliverable is required? Okay, so this again, this is thinking back to the auditor. Okay, why are you writing to them? What kind of deliverable is required? Okay, required or preferred. Okay, so that's about auditor preference. Why? What do you still need to find out about the subject? Okay, that's research. What research will I have? This second type of stuff. You can start with this when you're thinking about your collaborative research report or your final technical report. But either way, these are the planning steps that you need to consider first and foremost. All right. Now, when we talk about the auditor and the planning side of the auditor, here's what I would like for you guys to consider. There are four basically quadrants of how you can better understand your auditor. All right. First, characteristics. Who are they? What are their professional responsibilities? Okay. What's their professional experience? What kind of jargon and examples and whatever else will help them understand what I'm talking about? Okay, that's why it's important to know this. Demographic characteristics, if I'm going to make a reference to pop culture, what's the likelihood that they know what I'm talking about? If I'm going to make a reference to, you know, a well-known scientific idea, are they even trained in any science? Okay, so education, professional experience, professional responsibilities. These are things that you need to consider when writing for someone because that will shape the language and clarity and precision that you can get to, right? Auditor approach, right? What's your intended purpose, but what is their intended purpose? What are they going to do with this document? Okay, so yeah, this is color coded orange, which means it's tied to this idea of the red ore, but it has to do with understanding how they would see your approach to this and how they would your relationship to them. Okay, do you have a shared purpose? Do you have a shared sense of engagement? Probably not, but understanding that they're going to engage with it in this way can shape how you write a report. So for instance, if you think that this problem is very urgent and they are treating it like, I'll deal with it later, then your idea of engaging with the content is purpose is very different from theirs. So the way you write and the way you tailor that document needs to impress upon them the urgency that you see, okay? Or it needs to tamp down your sense of urgency to match with what they would want. All right. Auditor expectations, okay? What is the writer auditor attitude? What are personal preferences? Okay, do they have personal preferences? You're not going to know this with a blind submission or with the first time you write for someone, but if you work with your boss for a year or two, you probably figure out that they, prefer this and not this, or they want their documents to look like this, or they prefer their graphics be color coded in this way. And that goes for within a firm, an engineering firm, that goes with certain clients, that goes with a whole bunch of different auditors. And so knowing the personal preferences of the auditor or auditors that you're writing to is going to make your document much more effective. Okay, so just for instance, when I'm writing, I prefer not to use the same word in the next three, like in the same, within three sentences of each other. I violate that all the time. I mean, all you got to do is look at auditor, auditor, auditor. But I try to, in my own writing, to use a variety of words. Um, that is something that is a personal preference of mine that I'm aware of. But, other people might not be aware of their little picadillos or whatever else that change their approach to a document, right? Subject experience. What experience does the auditor have with the subject? Okay, so here we have professional responsibilities in education, but do they understand the subject and the content that you're going to deal with, or is this all new to them? All right, if you're talking about the Learn Anywhere initiative, how many websites have the people designed that whose website you're looking at or whatever else? Or what kind of experience do they have with online learning, right? That's going to make a big difference. You can notice that between your professors, I'm sure, those that have experience with online learning and those that have no experience with online learning. All right. And then deliverable modality. Okay. Contextual influence, extra-textual constraints, auditor's modal literacy. Okay. This is something that might throw you. What is modal literacy? Well, do they, or how familiar are they with reading stuff in a, would they prefer it in a PDF format, or are they fine with a multi-layered website? Or is the navigation preferred in one way or another? So I'm old school. So in terms of modal literacy, I can read online and all that sort of stuff, but I prefer physical books. So when it comes to positioning material for me, you might, and I'm not saying don't do this, especially not this semester for the final technical report, but you might, like if it were a longer report presented to me, it would be better to be printed out. It would be something that I'm more familiar with reading and more ready to flip through and understand well instead of a PDF that I have to scroll through. And a lot of people are the reverse. They prefer PDFs that they can scroll through or search. And if that's what you know, then you have to make sure and deliver a document that is searchable, for instance, or that has good bookmarks already embedded because that's what they prefer in a PDF format, right? So you got to think about these things, right? But you don't have to do it blind, right? That's what the purpose of a auditor profile is. It establishes your initial understanding and what the gaps are in your knowledge. And then through primary research, interviews, looking at auditor texts, talking to people that have written for this person before, all that sort of stuff will help you get a better understanding of these four things, which will then allow you to also do some secondary research if you choose and get a good understanding of who they are and what kind of thing they prefer, right? What I'm saying is an auditor profile is not just demographics and CV. That's what a lot of people run into, and they say, "Oh, I got a good profile. I know where they went to college, and I know that they are a white dude." Right? No, that's not going to help you too much because there's all this other stuff that you need to have a better understanding of. Right? So this is only part of it. That's initial understanding, and then how can you, or what are you going to do to get a better understanding of who they are? That's what I'm asking you guys to do with Practicum 3, is to get down and start understanding or knowing how and why to develop an audit, or how and why your auditor is reading this document. Okay. So what I'm asking you guys to do is in a template form, put together, and we'll talk about this in class, put together a template and use it to profile your auditor. I want two distinct profiles. One, they of your choosing. They could be anything. They could be something as professional as someone you're asking for a recommendation letter from, or they can be as personal as what do I need to know to. Sorry, I was about to encourage some really negative behavior. I was going to say to date someone. That's just really weird if you're doing that kind of research. But you can be more personal. It can be like, okay, I gotta ask this big favor of a friend of mine. What do I need to know in order to do that? Okay, so these are things that you will figure out, but please let me know if I can help. Here are some examples of different auditor profiles that you can do. So, your intended auditor for the final technical report, your intended auditor for the collaborative research report, professors whose courses you will take, internship directors or co-op directors, articles for publication. All these things are areas where you can help your auditor out by having a better understanding of how they would approach the situation. And that's what an auditor profile is there for. Okay? All right. We're going to end there. Have a good day, and I will see you guys in class. I've just introduced two major assignments and talked about a third, so there's a lot going on with this lecture. Please let me know if you have any questions about the final technical report or Practicum 3 or your collaborative research report. I'm happy to delve into any of the profiles or any of the prompts if you have questions, or to talk about any of the things that we talked about today. We will definitely delve into the information report in more detail and the different rhetorical move patterns as we get into it. We probably won't talk about all of them. I'm not going to talk about incident reports too much, but we will cover recommendation reports, field reports, information reports, lab reports, and literature reviews, as these are the major ones that you guys will all have to write in order to finish out your degree, or you will probably write in one or more of these as a professional when you leave UK. So that's why those are the 5 that we're gonna talk about this semester in much more detail. Take care. I will see you guys around, and again, let me know if you have any questions.